She stepped up as my wife and handled that. And it's been many times where I've been at my lowest and she's always been the strongest to get me back up to like, get back out there. You gotta get back out there and do what you do. Don't worry about what's happening over here. I'm gonna handle it.
This is the kind of quiet talk that moves through private rooms, industry dinners, and late-night conversations. It spreads slowly until a rumor stops feeling like a rumor and starts feeling like a storyline everyone already knows. And this storyline keeps circling back to the same trigger, the same name, the same point of tension. According to what has been repeated in certain circles, Snoop Dogg was not just angry with Sean Diddy Combs. The way this situation has been framed is far darker and far more personal than anything the public ever saw on camera. It was not about money, not about power, and not about a business disagreement. It was about betrayal. More specifically, it was about the idea that Shantae's name was pulled into Diddy's private world in a way Snoop could not ignore.
Same kind of extortion that we heard when Cassie took the stand and testified on that airplane ride back from France. Diddy said, "You don't do a freak off, I'm going to release one of the freak off videos that you are profiled in and humiliate you."
The theory that spread online did not appear as a single rumor that came and went. It was framed like a fuse, like an ultimate violation, something that once it reached Snoop could only end one way. Once that framing took hold, the rest of the story almost wrote itself. The timeline became the backbone of the narrative. In March of 2024, Homeland Security investigators raided properties connected to Diddy in Los Angeles and Miami. That moment made the situation feel real, not just like internet noise. Then, on September 16, 2024, Diddy was arrested. Those dates matter because they are the anchors people use to build the theory around Snoop. By the time the arrest happened, the internet version of the story claimed that Snoop and Diddy had already gone silent, that they had not spoken in months, that something had fractured long before the public noticed, and that the breaking point was not a headline or a press release. It was Shantae.
The turmoil and the stuff that I put her through in my journey on becoming successful, because I had no understanding of what I was doing her, how I was hurt.
There was no confession, no leaked recording, and nothing proven on paper. Just the kind of allegation that spreads fast because it targets the most protected part of a public image. People claimed Shantae's name was tied to Diddy's after-hours orbit in a way Snoop reportedly believed was unforgivable. Once people believe a marriage is under threat, they start looking for motives everywhere. They start asking how a federal case becomes so detailed. Because what stood out in this situation was not just the scandal itself, but the specificity. People talked about logistics, locations, coordination, and trails, the kind of structure that makes outsiders feel like someone on the inside helped connect the dots. That is where the theory pivots towards Snoop. Their legacies are tied to the same golden era of hip-hop, and their circles overlapped for years.
You get to be the age that we are and you get to become as successful as we are, you have to start doing some things that matter for the future.
Sources close to both camps have long hinted that beneath the public smiles, there was quiet competition. Snoop built his empire around longevity, loyalty, and reinvention. Diddy thrived on control, spectacle, and being the loudest presence in the room. When the legal storm around Diddy turned into a full public collapse, the rumor that refused to die was this: that investigators did not stumble into those details by accident, that someone with reach and memory, someone close enough to the machine, quietly pointed them in the right direction, the right dates, the right doors, the right people. In the theory, Snoop was not the headline, he was the compass. To understand why Shantae's name carries so much weight.
Your wife's been by you for your
She's
whole
your high
career.
school
Your high school sweetheart. She is.
You never leave home without it.
Yeah, that's right. But how has she kind of taken you on this journey? Tell us about her.
I think my wife has been my best friend for a couple of reasons. One is that she always understood who I was and who I needed to become.
You have to understand what she represents in Snoop's world and why the internet treats her as the one boundary no one should cross. This story does not begin in a courtroom. It begins with a marriage. Shantae Broaddus was born and raised in Long Beach. She met Calvin Broaddus long before the world knew him as Snoop Dogg, back when they were teenagers at Long Beach Polytechnic High School. They went to prom together and built a life before fame entered the picture. They married in June of 1997 and became one of the rare constants in an industry built on temptation and chaos. Shantae was there during the death row era. She was there when alliances broke and the industry shifted.
Times you would have him with a younger female, and there's a power dynamic there. A more impressionable girl is easier to reel in. Consent is between the people that are engaging, and I wasn't there in these situations to understand the consent.
She stayed through reinvention after reinvention as Snoop turned himself into a global brand, not just a rapper. In 2021, she officially became his manager, overseeing business ventures, television projects, and brand deals. Snoop has described her as his final gut check, the last voice he listens to before signing anything. The one person who can tell him no when everyone else says yes. That is why when people online say Shantae's name was dragged into Diddy's orbit, it does not land like random gossip. It lands like an attack on the foundation. According to the theory, Snoop did not need proof the way the internet demands proof. He needed something believable enough to treat as a threat. And once he treated it as a threat, everything became strategy. Then another voice entered the story and kept poking the same wound. Suge Knight.
Tick tock, the clock is ticking on Diddy because on Friday he finds out what his sentence is going to be, but today he found out what prosecutors would like that sentence to be, and it is vastly different from what his attorneys have suggested to the judge. Prosecutors want him to do 11 years, just over 11.
Early in 2024, Suge reappeared in the conversation from behind bars, taunting through interviews and podcast clips. One moment kept getting repeated because it was designed to provoke. A photo, a line, a jab aimed directly at Shantae, at the marriage, and at Snoop's pride. Some people dismissed it as desperate provocation. Others believed Suge knew exactly which nerve to hit, not because he cared about the truth, but because he cared about the reaction. And the reaction was not explosive. It was quiet. Behind the scenes, Snoop was described as withdrawn and focused, colder than usual. Like someone who decided the smartest move was not to argue publicly, but to watch and measure. Then the raids happened. Then the arrest happened. Suddenly, the rumor stream had a storyline that felt almost too clean. A quiet build, followed by a public collapse. As the case unfolded, legal claims described private events in harsh language, painting a picture of control and coercion. Testimony and legal arguments fueled the idea that there was a hidden world behind the parties people once joked about. The public kept circling back to the same question. How did investigators get so specific? How did the story move from whispers to something that could be charged, argued, and sentenced?
Well, we all know that. I have to say, I'd never heard of this movie, and I have little kids. It was called Lightyear from 2022. I have absolutely no problem with the content. Like, he had a problem with the content in that movie. I have no problem at all. I thought that was presented as a brief history part of this movie. It wasn't a big part of the movie, and gay couples exist, and gay marriage is legal, and I found it all completely unproblematic. That said,
that is why the rumor machine keeps returning to the idea of structured information. People believe the authorities had unusually detailed logistics, not just stories or impressions, but coordinated facts that made the case feel organized. And in the court of public opinion, that kind of organization always points to an insider. So the theory points back to Snoop again. He had been around Diddy's world in the past, but according to the narrative, he kept his distance after 2020. When tensions between entourages began rising and overlap started feeling risky. Those close to him say Snoop has always been protective of his image, and especially protective of Shantae's reputation. He survived his own storms, lawsuits, and public noise that came and went. But this was different. These were rumors that never fully disappeared. But through all of it, Shantae remained the anchor. By late 2023, she was managing major opportunities and expanding the broadest brand in a serious way. Because of that, within this theory, the idea that Shantae's name was pulled into a scandal tied to Diddy's private world is not seen as simple disrespect. It is seen as crossing a line. And once a line like that is crossed, the theory says retaliation is not loud or emotional. It is calculated. People who believe this narrative trace that retaliation to early 2024. After public taunts and online pressure, Snoop's calm public posture looked like dismissal, but those around him claimed he was furious in private. Within weeks, reports began circulating that federal investigators had reached out to a major industry figure for information connected to Diddy's wider network. When Diddy was arrested in September, that same figure, unnamed in filings and discussions, was described in a way that made the internet jump to one conclusion. a longtime West Coast artist turned entrepreneur. To those reading between the lines, the internet decided there was little doubt who that description was meant to point toward. Still, the theory is not framed as revenge alone. It is framed as survival. The investigation touched dozens of celebrities, and rumors swirled that recognizable faces could be pulled into the narrative. People argue that cooperating would not only damage a rival, but also protect your own family from being dragged into the blast radius. That belief brings the story right back to Shantae again. Public sympathy leaned toward her. She had spent more than 27 years balancing loyalty and independence, often operating as the quiet force behind Snoop's empire. Snoop has described her as the good to my bad. But by early 2025, the internet started reading meaning into everything. Photos of Shantae appearing alone at events, captions that felt careful and deliberate, words like trust and truth being highlighted. None of it was proof of anything, but it was enough for the internet to build another layer onto the existing narrative. At the same time, Suge Knight continued pushing the same pressure points. He hinted, implied, and dared people to question what they thought they knew about the Broaddus household. Snoop's silence did the rest. While the court case played out in New York, Snoop stayed away from cameras and refused to engage. He appeared publicly only once at a national broadcasting event in March of 2025 and shut down all questions about the case. To casual observers, it looked like distance. To people deep in the theory, it looked like control. Prosecutors referenced third-party communications and corroborated accounts tied to private gatherings. Once the public hears terms like third-party communications, the next leap is automatic. Who supplied them? The internet version of the story claims a trusted veteran of the music industry was involved behind the scenes, and that investigators had unusually specific logistics. Again, not proven as public fact in the way the internet presents it, but repeated enough that it became part of the narrative structure. Then the legal reality landed in July of 2025. The verdict surprised many people. Not guilty on the most extreme charges the public expected, but guilty on 2 transportation-related counts. In October of 2025, the sentence followed: 50 months in prison and a significant financial penalty. For months after the arrest, Diddy was held at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, which is why that name became part of public vocabulary. After sentencing, he was transferred to the Federal Correctional Institution at Fort Dix in New Jersey. That detail matters because Fort Dix signals the present timeline. Saying Metropolitan Detention Center sounds outdated. Fort Dix makes the story feel current. As of early 2026, the appeal remains active. The next headlines depend on what gets filed, what gets argued, and how quickly the court moves. There is even a projected release date that keeps getting repeated: May 8th, 2028. The date may shift, but it anchors the story in the present. Then another detail surfaced that made people feel the chessboard was still moving. In early 2026, Diddy's Beverly Hills home was reportedly pulled from the market again. When that happened, many took it as proof the story was not finished. That moves were still happening behind the scenes. That cleanup was still underway. That decisions were still being made. Throughout all of this, the rumor machine keeps circling back to one thing: Shantae. Because the story people keep telling is not just that Diddy fell, but that he fell for a reason, and that the reason connects to the Broaddus marriage. Some insiders whisper that Snoop is quietly satisfied. Not publicly, not with any visible victory lap, but in the way powerful people sometimes celebrate by staying calm while someone else collapses. Even in that version, though, the victory carries a shadow. Beneath the surface of the conviction sits another question people cannot stop asking. If Snoop's motive was protecting Shantae, why do whispers persist that he may also have been protecting himself? Why do people insist there are names in the broader story that have not been revealed? Why do some former staffers claim that a name closer to Snoop exists in the same orbit? As the narrative grows, it becomes larger than revenge. It becomes strategy. And that is where Death Row enters the picture. Snoop's acquisition of Death Row Records was framed publicly as a full-circle moment in hip-hop history. But Suge Knight did not treat it like a comeback story. From prison, he framed it as theft. He repeatedly claimed the paperwork was illegitimate and that the deal was manipulated through corporate connections and legal maneuvering the public could not see. In hip-hop, claims like that are never just noise. They are positioning. They are warnings. They shape belief before documents ever surface. Critics noticed the optics, how quickly the acquisition was finalized, how fast the brand shifted into something cleaner, more mainstream, and more family-friendly. For someone once accused of glorifying the streets, it looked like the ultimate redemption arc, unless that redemption came at someone else's expense. That is why some observers connect the dots the way they do. They argue that distancing from Diddy, even quietly and indirectly, would insulate the broadest brand from contamination. Being seen on the safer side of the line, as an ally instead of a target, would protect business networks and future deals. That is the kind of move people associate with executives, not rappers. But Snoop has blurred that line for years, and Shantae sits at the center of that business identity. To outsiders, she looks like the loyal wife pulled into scandal. But those who claim to know the broadest enterprise describe a more complex role. As Snoop's manager, Shantae is not a bystander. She is involved in key business moves and brand decisions. Insiders claim she pushed for safer positioning, cleaner lanes, and long-term stability. So when the allegations surrounding Diddy began to spread, some voices claimed that Shantae advised Snoop to legally and morally distance himself from anything connected to Combs' lifestyle. That phrasing carries weight now because it raises a question people can't stop asking. Was she simply protecting her husband? Or was she quietly preparing the conditions for a complete separation between the broadest brand and one of the most toxic names in modern entertainment? Some insiders push the theory even further, alleging that Shantae may have played a role in organizing information, digital trails, communications, and archived details. Not to attack, but to make sure her family stayed clean while the storm moved elsewhere. If that were true, it would completely change how people interpret her role. Not as a victim, but as a strategist. And that paradox, the alleged target becoming the quiet engine behind a public downfall, is exactly why this narrative refuses to fade. The case against Diddy did not rest on one lawsuit or a single witness. It was built through corroboration, timelines, and structured documentation. That kind of structure makes the public feel like there are still stories under the surface that haven't been told. That's how theories are born. And Suge Knight understands that better than anyone. That's why he keeps teasing bigger revelations, warning that a tell-all book is on the way. He claims it will expose who really sold out who, and he has hinted that Snoop's rise from death row artist to global businessman was built on deals made far from public view. Given Suge's reputation, many dismiss this as bitterness from behind bars. But the tone shifted when talk started circulating about subpoenas reaching into old death row connections and financial records. Suddenly, Suge's rants sounded less like random revenge and more like someone trying to get ahead of a story before it reaches him. If that book ever sees the light of day, it could ignite another firestorm and force the industry to reconsider the alliances that shaped modern hip-hop. While Snoop fortified his empire, Diddy's world collapsed in public view. During sentencing in the fall of 2025, Diddy appeared visibly drained. Reports described him admitting that he got lost in excess, a line that captured the image people had watched for decades: wealth, control, appetite, and the belief that consequences would never arrive. Prosecutors described influence and fear as tools used to hold his inner circle together. Witnesses described private encounters that blurred the line between loyalty and exploitation. The conviction didn't land exactly how the public expected, but the symbolic reversal was massive. The mogul who once ruled over stars was now inside the system, eventually transferred to Fort Dix in New Jersey. That contrast is why the industry keeps whispering. While Diddy wakes up to steel doors and inmate counts, Snoop wakes up to board meetings, family dinners, and a brand that stretches from music to television to business ventures. It's a reversal that makes people ask whether Snoop outmaneuvered a system that once threatened to consume everyone around him, or whether he is simply a survivor who learned how to trade timing, distance, and silence for survival. Either way, his control of death row, his standing with major networks, and his carefully protected public image make him one of the last seemingly untouchable figures from that generation, at least on the surface. But the whispers are growing louder. There are claims that Diddy has been speaking privately with journalists, teasing other names and other targets, and if he ever gains leverage through appeals, if he ever tries to negotiate, this entire saga could reignite overnight, especially if he hints at anyone connected to Snoop's inner circle. At the same time, Shantae's memoir, Paid the Cost to be the Boss Lady, looms over the narrative. No one knows how directly it will address the rumors or any connection to Diddy. But in stories like this, timing always looks intentional. A carefully written chapter could either calm speculation or fuel it without saying much at all. Insiders also warn that this story is bigger than one case, that other files exist, that other names exist, that other chapters may still be forming. As one former label executive put it bluntly, if someone helped once, they can help again. And everyone knows it. Whether that's true or not, fear alone reshapes relationships. Artists distance themselves quietly. Camps split without announcements. Invitations stop coming. No one wants to be too close when the next headline drops. This isn't just revenge versus justice. It's the possibility of a reckoning across the hip-hop establishment itself. A generation that once ruled through swagger and secrecy is now facing an era where private behavior doesn't stay buried the way it used to. At the center of it all, people keep pointing to Snoop Dogg and Shantae Broaddus as twin pillars. One of legacy, one of loyalty, both carrying knowledge that could shake the foundation of the culture they helped build. But too many questions remain. Did Snoop act to protect Shantae or to secure his empire? Was Shantae a betrayed partner or the quiet architect of a plan that kept the Broaddus name clean while someone else took the fall? Could Suge Knight's accusations about death row be tied to the same network of influence? And if Snoop ever did give authorities what they needed once, who might be next if the pressure ever shifts toward him? In a world built on fame and secrecy, power is never permanent. It only changes hands. And this story doesn't feel finished. There may be messages that never surface, testimony still sealed, voices still afraid to speak. Diddy's conviction may have closed one chapter, but the book is still wide open. So here's the real question. When the next wave of information drops, will Snoop still be seen as the survivor who played it smart, or will he become the next name? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more deep dives like this, make sure you subscribe to Drama and Brief. This storm is far from over.